Chapter 1: Poisonous Mushroom on a Spring Day. Erna Hardy was a well-mannered girl. Now that she had matured into a polite lady, it was her turn to become a refined wife. In summary, the lengthy paragraph revealed a response that was far from what she had anticipated, shattering her hopes of being a good wife to a respectable man. No way. Erna's eyes, which had been fixed on a letter for a long time, brimmed with determination as she spoke to herself. This is ridiculous. Even upon reflection, her conclusion remained unchanged. Rising from her seat, Erna approached the window. The afternoon sun poured in, bright and warm, yet she felt a heavy gloom. With a squeak, she opened the window and sat on the frame, hugging her knees. From the mansion of the Badens, she could see the village below. Her gaze briefly lingered on a solitary chair in the garden before drifting over the gentle slopes of the orchard, the streams, and the hills adorned with yellow cherries. The world seemed indifferent to one man's misfortune. This realization unsettled her. Despite having a loving family, she was on the brink of being cast out from a vibrant life. The beauty of the joyous spring felt almost mocking. If someone were to hear her petty complaints, they would undoubtedly laugh. Yet a sense of relief mixed with cynicism washed over her. Lady Erna!" The voice of Mrs. Grebe, the housekeeper, echoed from down the hallway. It seemed lunchtime had arrived. "Yes, I'm here. I'll be right there." Erna called back, quickly hopping off the window frame. She tucked the ridiculous letter deep into a drawer, ensuring it was out of sight, and tidied her disheveled clothes. She was fine. As she made her way to the dining room on the first floor, she murmured to herself like a mantra, "It's okay. Everything is going to be fine." "Have you seen a lawyer, Erna?" Baroness Baden, who had been chatting about the weather and new sculptures, finally broached the subject after they had finished eating. She tried to maintain her composure, but her eyes betrayed an indescribable anxiety. "No, Grandma, not yet," Erna replied firmly. "I'll make sure to meet one before the week is out." Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating Erna's neck and waist. Her heart raced, her lips felt parched, and her fingers curled into fists. Fortunately, the Baroness nodded, refraining from further questioning. "Yes, you should. I wish I could find a way." A gentle sigh filled the overly still room. Erna glanced up at her grandmother, who stared at her hands resting on her knees. In just a month, she had aged and weakened. Having lost her husband overnight, she was now set to pass on her modest assets to a relative no better than the rest. How could Erna reveal the truth? Erna straightened her posture, swallowing the dry lump in her throat. Her lips remained stubbornly sealed, refusing to divulge the reality. In truth, she had already met with a lawyer. The answer had been what she expected. With no son, Baron Baden's estate was to be inherited by his nephew. Erna had long been aware of such absurd laws. It was upsetting and unfair, but if the law couldn't be changed, they needed to devise a countermeasure. It was time for Erna to start saving, working little by little to buy back this house one day. Unfortunately, that one day had come too soon, and her savings were insufficient. "Unfortunately, that is how the inheritance law works, Miss Hardy." The lawyer had responded insincerely to her pleas for alternatives. For now, it would be best to explain the situation to Mrs. Baden and ask for mercy. He had ended his remarks with a puff on his smoking pipe, a rude gesture that Erna had endured. There weren't many lawyers willing to help clients who struggled to pay consultation fees. That afternoon, Erna had written to Thomas Baden, feeling compelled to do so in the absence of a suitable lawyer. Today, his reply had turned her faint hopes into despair and anger. "Everything will be fine, Grandma. Don't worry too much." Erna lied, forcing a smile to reassure her grandmother as she rose from the table and donned an apron. She deftly assisted Mrs. Grebe, who had arrived slowly, to clear the table. Everything was not fine. While scrubbing the dishes, Erna confronted the truth she could no longer ignore. It was no exaggeration to say that Baron Baden's estate, a once noble lineage, now consisted solely of this house in the countryside. Soon it would be claimed by Thomas Baden, the legitimate heir, who would sell the land without hesitation. Erna inhaled deeply, suppressing her anger. The soapy water from the sponge left a small stain on her rolled-up sleeve and apron. Thomas Baden claimed to understand her situation, however. He had his own reasons for not delaying the sale of the house until Baroness Baden passed away. She wouldn't have felt this way if he had simply expressed a firm refusal. After washing the dishes, Erna strolled to the backyard, her apron still rolled up. Sitting in her grandfather's chair beneath the lovely ash tree, tears threatened to spill from her eyes. Thomas Baden's outrageous reply had included one compromise. If Erna Hardy married him, he would be particularly generous. The view of the beautiful spring landscape blurred through her tears, but she fought to keep them at bay. She refused to cry over such a person, a father who treated his helpless relative, still young and unfulfilled. "Father," she muttered, surprised by the thought. She had forgotten about him for so long, yet she knew he still existed in this world. "Yes, father." Wiping her eyes, she leapt from her chair. The strings of her unfastened apron fluttered in the spring breeze. What woke Bjorn was the noise outside, which even the closed panes and thick curtains couldn't muffle. The loud cheers from the river beside the grand reservoir filled his dimly lit bedroom. He buried his head under a pillow and cushion, hoping to return to sleep, but ultimately surrendered. "Peppy crazy bastards," Bjorn cursed as he climbed out of bed. Pulling aside the curtain covering the western window, he spotted a group practicing rowing on the opposite bank. Every summer, the River Abbot, which flowed through the city to the sea, hosted a rowing competition for nobles. The long summers made it hard to do anything but indulge in parties and gossip, but the proximity of the river to a large reservoir made the noise unbearable when practice began in spring. Leaning against the window, Bjorn's disgusted gaze settled on a narrow boat, glaring at the exuberant boys aboard. "You'd be better off finding a way to release that overflowing energy in other ways, you maniacs." A more productive hobby than this pointless exertion would serve them well. In the worst case, they could even contribute to the kingdom's growth by producing at least one child. Of course, that would complicate their personal histories, but the folly of these reckless fools was none of his concern. Taking a sip of warm water from the table, Bjorn turned around, running his fingers through his messy hair. Wrapping a robe around himself, he rang the bell for his butler, Greg. Greg, well aware of the reason for the noon bell, rushed in to report before Bjorn could ask. The number of teams participating this year has increased, making it a bit noisier. Bjorn chuckled at the tragic news. They're all enthusiastic about Leonid de Neister winning the championship, a bunch of lunatics playing bridesmaids. "Would you like to move your bedroom?" "Nah, it's fine. Then I'll prepare your meal, just fruits, on the balcony." Bjorn left a brief order and headed to the bathroom. After a refreshing shower, he found a table waiting for him on the balcony. Sipping a cold whiskey soda, he gazed at the view below. The grand fountain, a highlight of Schwerin Palace, danced joyfully. The gold statues adorning the fountain shimmered as water cascaded from them under the bright spring sun. Bjorn's gaze followed the waterway that flowed past the fountain, tracing the slope of the stairs connecting the grand park to the garden. The loud commotion from the River Abbot still echoed in the background. "His Highness, the prince has finished eating," Greg announced hurriedly just as Bjorn was about to set his glass down. After wiping the remaining water from his fingers with a napkin, Bjorn nodded, picking up an apple. Shortly after Greg exited, Leonid entered the room, striding in and taking a seat opposite him. It was clear he had escaped from rowing practice. "Your Highness, the Crown Prince," Bjorn greeted his younger brother with elegance, contrasting with Leonid's casual posture, legs crossed. Water droplets from his platinum hair dripped as he moved. Leonid stared at him in astonishment, while Bjorn focused on the grand fountain in the garden. The sweet pulp of the fruit matched the floral scents wafting through the air. "Tell me what you need." Once the servants had cleared away the prince's share of the meal, Bjorn squinted at Leonid. Schwerin, where the Grand Duke's palace was located, was a resort city frequented by Lechen's nobles during the summer. Though still early in the season, the prince, obsessed with coordination, had moved to the Schwerin palace ahead of time, integrating himself into his brother's daily life. "Is the royal poisonous mushroom all right?" Bjorn's forehead furrowed at the absurd headline. "Poisonous mushroom? Is the royal poisonous mushroom all right?" Bjorn's forehead furrowed at the absurd headline. "Poisonous mushroom? You didn't know? I thought it was your new nickname. Poisonous mushroom. After a moment of contemplation, Bjorn laughed, setting the paper down. The article, despite its ridiculousness, included a rather flattering picture. Gladys is coming back to Lechen. Leonid, still observing Bjorn closely, cautiously spoke. The mention of Gladys wiped the smile from Bjorn's face. The tabloid piece he had read thoroughly detailed the return of Gladys Hartford, the Prince of Lars, who planned to spend the summer in Lechen. A beautiful princess once adored by all of Lechen. Her return, after being betrayed by her husband and losing her child, was bound to stir gossip. With her ex-husband now dubbed the poisonous mushroom, the narrative would be even more tantalizing. Are you going to appeal, Bjorn? Let's see. Bjorn's serious demeanor elicited a laugh from Leonid. Pausing from his apple, Bjorn wiped the juice from his fingers, leaning back in his chair. His calm eyes held little emotion. Spring, a perfect season for poisonous mushrooms to thrive.